Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Andrew Turner, founder and host of the G&T Sessions podcast. And today we have an amazing guest, Mr. Leda Glyptis. How are you, Leda? Good to see you.
I am very well. Good to see you.
And actually, what we've done today is, as part of our usual worldwide tour, we've actually flew on the G&T Sessions sponsored helicopter to Athens. And I came to find you, obviously, you see, and I've heard you're just around the corner. Sat in a lovely room.
I'm finding this really exciting. And it is. I am indeed in Athens, as are you, with the amazing backdrop behind you.
Exactly.
And you have better weather than I do right now in your beautiful blue sky backdrop. It's quite overcast here today.
I must be in my virtual reality kind of near Colosseum kind of look and feel.
No compromises in your virtual reality.
Exactly. So it's great to have you in the show. Thank you for agreeing to come on the show. So one of the things I suppose to kick off the show is what gets you up in the morning? What's going on in Leda's world these days?
Leda's world is very busy at the moment. I'm doing a variety of things, which is always great for keeping your energy levels up and for keeping the ideas going. But of course, when you're doing a variety of things, the assumption in your own head is that you will split your time between them. But then the reality is that if you are a problem solver, which I am, and you have a slight OCD streak and that you want to get stuck in and do things now, you end up thinking about these things and doing about these things round the clock, which is a good problem to have in some ways, but it's super, super busy. So I'm doing a series of non-executive directorship roles with 3 companies that I find absolutely fascinating. I'm doing some advisory work with some very, very interesting players, and I am also doing my sort of writing and sort of ecosystem work, mentoring startups and stuff. So it's brilliant, and it's great to see so many good ideas and so much good work being done. But I do feel like I'm on 24/7 these days.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing. As you get more experience, you kind of come across lots of different things you want to work on. It's that time management and actually prioritizing and things like that. It becomes this thing where you kind of, I suppose it also depends on time zones as well. So are they all in the same time zone, or are they all in different time zones across the world?
They're not all in the same time zone. The non-exec roles are all roughly in the same time zone. Yeah, roughly. And then the advisory work I'm doing is spanning the rest of the universe. But I think as we're getting stuck, and part of it is about time management and prioritization. Part of it is about this inherent curiosity that is driving a lot of us in this space, and that desire to do everything at once now. Which is a common trait, I think, in our world, but also one that could leave you running 100 million miles an hour.
So it's like make sure you don't get burnt out. I suppose that's the thing, isn't it?
It's fine. I'm pretty good at downing tools when I need to. Many years in the making, that skill, but I've got it now.
It's one of your superpowers.
Now it is. When I was a corporate citizen and I had the BlackBerry with a little blinking red light, I wasn't so good at it. But now I can do it. It's like now is the weekend or the evening and I'm not working anymore. It can't happen every time, but when it needs to happen, I can do it.
So I know that you've kind of been, I suppose, what I would say is a key procrastinator, or not procrastinator, a key person that's kind of been influencing the evolution of financial services, over the last number of years. And I suppose, but you started that. You started in a traditional sense in a bank, in a very prestigious bank, and then you've kind of evolved into kind of being more of a commentator, as I saw recently. How have you found that kind of transition?
There hasn't been much of a transition in terms of my day job, in the sense that I've been working in financial technology, ops and governance for client-facing deployments for the past like 15 years, a variety of roles, as you say, some of them with big institutions, some of them with smaller institutions, some of them working inside traditional IT, some of them working in an innovation department, some of them working for a vendor. So the job hasn't changed very much, other than my position in the organization. The hierarchy has changed. So what I do day to day has changed. What has definitely changed is both my position in the wider community. When I started my career, I don't think I had very much to say, and even if I did, no one would listen. But there is definitely a community that is eager and keen to have dialogues about how this evolution is going and what we're getting wrong and what we're getting right. So you're absolutely right there. The other thing I think has changed is that transition from there is no community to there is a sort of nascent ecosystem where we talk about things, but it's mostly journalists and maybe some founders doing the talking. Then we have the rise of the influencer. And they did a great job at painting that sort of futurist image. And I think we're getting to a place of, we know where we're trying to get to, but we don't necessarily know what it means for us. We know where we are, but we don't necessarily know what we need to do next. And I think having those of us who have the sort of battle scars from having tried to do it, sometimes successfully, sometimes less so, are part of an ongoing dialogue. A few months ago, actually just before the pandemic, there's that annual Women in FinTech Power List that comes out, and it's a very it's an honor, obviously, to be included in it. Although I've never seen a Men in FinTech Power List, so it tells you we have a problem to solve. But I have been on this list over the years. And it's always a thrill. And the first time I saw my name on there, I was like, oh my God. This year was the first year that I was in a veterans category.
Wow.
And what does that tell you other than I am old? And I don't feel old, but evidently I am. So we've been doing this a very long time. We've been doing this a really long time. We're having now a brand new generation that is coming into this game. Which is both great and a flag that we may not have done enough.
How can you be called a veteran? I mean, it's not. I mean, I can't comprehend that. I mean, it's just. It
was a shock for me as well. But if you think about, I've been in financial services for just shy of 15 years now.
Right.
There are those who say that that's how old fintech is. If we start the clock with a sort of advent of Zopa, and the amount of technology innovation, the amount of players that didn't exist and have entered the fray, the way in which the market has changed, and also the fact that there is a generation of practitioners, product, tech, business practitioners that are in their late 20s right now, have some experience and meaningful experience. They didn't just finish university, but have no idea of what the world we started work in is like. I understand why, if you're still in the game, you would be considered a veteran. I mean, I started doing IT deployments when we still had super users and green cursors. Right. Yeah. Remember the green cursors blinking? So there is an acknowledgement that the world has moved on a lot. Not enough, I'll grant you, but definitely a lot.
But what you're saying is, you're saying that some people coming straight into the world now, where I don't know. I know it's an overused example, but the kind of the neobanks, yeah. Mm-hmm. The kind of Monzo, Starling, Revolut, all those kind of, that is the kind of, they're already established. So, but they've never worked in a traditional institution. You've gone straight into that kind of that fintech world, although the fintech world.
I would say that some of the people who work for them, definitely. I mean, Anne Bowden is much more of a veteran than I am in terms of the wealth of experience she has. And even Nikolai Stronsky, who's much younger than both Anne and myself, came from a traditional bank. So I think there is that space that says that a lot of the people joining these banks today never knew what it is we tried to start fixing.
Right.
But I would say the same applies the other way. So if you ever have Megan Kaywood as a guest here,
Megan Kaywood,
Megan went from zero, I believe, to Starling and then to Barclays. And I bet the Barclays Megan walked into, although obviously it has a long way to go, and if it didn't, it wouldn't have hired Megan. It's a very different institution to Barclays 20 years ago.
Yes, yeah.
So I think it is an interesting highlight of we have gone a long way. We have achieved a lot. But if the name of the game was transformation for agility and relevance, then I would say we're not there yet.
And what have you? So obviously there was when you're in an institution, when you're working in a large organization like that, you obviously I think you're involved in the innovation side of that. So you're involved in looking at the future of banking. What was that right?
So yes, but not only. So I started my career in ops. So I did ops and IT. Started in ops, moved to IT, and then I had roles in innovation. But I was never in the type of innovation department that just does, 10 years out, 15 years out. Although there was definitely an element of which is the direction of travel for the world and which way do we think the trends are going so that we can invest in the right capabilities. Both the innovation departments I worked in had a much more pragmatic approach. Within BNY Mellon, the approach was second horizon innovation. So if you have a sense of the way the world is going, then it is important to find the capabilities that will allow our clients to invest their time with us today so that we can have a joint offering tomorrow. And a lot of what we were doing was playing with those technologies that would allow us to keep developing that conversation. We weren't doing smart fridges and all of that to leap into a future that was too abstract. We needed to keep an eye on that future, but it was much more about generating value for our clients using newer technology, but not experiments that won't see the light of day for 10 years. It's like
co-creation kind of thing. It's co-creation. Yes. Look at building customer loyalty or client loyalty. Is that the
Yes, and very, very much so. And the way that we had set up the innovation capability within BNY Mellon was that if we co-create with a client on top of our infrastructure and capabilities, it doesn't have to be on the existing technology, but it has to be on the existing offering. So if you work with a client to take that offering a little bit further using new technology, integrations with startups on top of our world or inside our ecosystem, then you create, as you say, stickiness, loyalty, and inspiration, but also you create an offering that is bespoke to a particular client, but you walk away with know-how that says, if that was a delighter for a particular pension fund, I can package this now and roll it out to all my other pension funds, not with all the bells and whistles that we created for this particular client, because those are bespoke, but a sort of more vanilla service that I can roll out across the board, which is a proactive gesture, a delighter for the client, and a sort of constant promise of renewal, which worked really well. Right. So it was not a futuristic, let's go to conferences and see what happens in 10 years' time only. And I know some innovation departments who do that. We had to keep an eye on the 10-year horizon to know what to advocate for the 2-year horizon. Yeah.
So you're kind of a bit like you're trying to balance being grounded and being fixed to the reality of today, but also not miss something that could be in the future. You're not trying to. I don't know. The question for me would be, I suppose, about it's like applying this kind of Elon Musk thinking to banking. Is that just too futuristic? You think in some banks are just too far out? Their planning horizon.
Well, let me answer the last question first. It's absolutely too futuristic for their existing planning horizon, because the way, as you well know, the bank's plan is quarterly and annual. So beyond that, it's very
tough. It's a tough sell. Yeah,
it's very fuzzy, right? So anything that has a return or an implementation date much beyond that falls in a higher risk bucket, and when with good reason, because you've seen that the most long drawn out, particularly IT projects in banks, projects that are scheduled to take 5 years tend to take 10 and cost 3 times as much and all the rest of it. So there are reasons why banks are apprehensive. But I think, so from a governance perspective, they're not necessarily set up to have those discussions. But I also think that fundamentally, the fintech innovation space has asked banks the wrong exam question, because we have had that moment in time where technology started coming at us as institutional players at the same time as startups started becoming a more viable business vehicle. So it wasn't just a vendor saying, would you like to use this shiny thing? It was a series of players saying, well, I'm going to use this thing. And in using this thing, I may change your world. And I am taking some of the choice away from you. What are you going to do? So I think that for a long time, the reaction of the banks was, well, let's understand what's going on here, which is absolutely right. Let's understand the technologies. Let's test them for robustness. Let's see if they're real. Are they vaporware? Can they scale? And let's also kick the tires of those startups and see if there's something for us to learn, build, buy. That is an absolutely vital stage in this process, but it is a stage. 15 years on, I would say we're still sort of trying to stay in that learning space. For me, the question that a bank should not, the question that a bank should be answering is not what should I do with AI? It should be, in a world where technology is much smarter than me and where regulators have increasingly different expectations of me, and where commerce and day-to-day life is digitizing in a way that presents both challenge and opportunity. Where is I'm the bank in this scenario, where is my purpose? Where is my value add? Where is my opportunity? And in answering that, you have your answer of what technology you need to invest in. But here's an AI experiment that doesn't answer any business problems, is how you end up never going live with these things.
Yeah, because it becomes like the shiny object syndrome.
Exactly. And it becomes a genuine intellectual exercise, which is very, very useful. But when the world's on fire, it's not where you're going to spend your time and money.
So, I mean, I remember talking to Jackie Taylor about this, who obviously was pretty involved in the original formation, opposed to kind of the financial crisis of the late 2000s. About when they all got together in Old Street, I remember, around that area kind of thing, before they moved to the various different Shoreditch and stuff, about looking at, how do you actually start to look at these, be open to innovation and open to rethinking all these different customer experiences and start to do something about it, because it obviously wasn't working in the right depth. I mean, in your, we're now like 10 years ahead of there. I mean, what are you seeing now today? Are you seeing? It sounds like you say with your Megan Cawood example, you're saying that you've seen a kind of a movement forward in some of the larger institutions, but then you still believe there's a long way to go. We're now in 2020, going the 10 years. What have you observed? Is the kind of the thinking and the mindset changed, or is it still, short-term planning, quarterly, annual planning, etc., etc.?
You want the bad news first or the good news first?
I don't mind. I mean, given what's going on this year, you never know what's going to happen every day, do you? Really?
So let me. I think it's a mixed picture. It's mixed across the industry, and it's mixed within organizations. I think there's still an undeniable element of wanting to get brownie points for low effort initiatives.
Right. Okay.
And not always being able to carry the complexity of certain below the glass implementations. So I'd say on the one hand,
so acting too tactical, you mean, and not being strategic.
I wouldn't even call it tactical. Sometimes it's just jazz hands. So I would say that most banks have done all the things that were low hanging fruit.
Right. Okay.
So most banks have an app for their retail customers with much better user experience. Very few banks have the web interface and the app living on the same infrastructure.
Right.
Because that's less visible, quite a lot of heavy lifting. It touches the infrastructure pieces that will be messy and expensive to fix. And I think that's a reality that we have to face up to, because in order to do real-time digital services, that next layer is extremely important. What we see with COVID is a bifiguration of the landscape, because everyone across the board found themselves under a lot of pressure to deliver against certain government initiatives and against their own sense of duty to their customers. So payment holidays, interest rate changes, but most of their systems underneath did not have the capability to process that quickly. So some people did a hack, some people did a change, some people built a brand new platform.
Right.
The urgency meant that everyone did something to move the conversation forward. What I would like to see next is people going, well, we can't maintain the urgency the same way because it's just not possible, but we can maintain the focus. And one of the things that we saw with COVID was banks that had 20 committed projects for the year dropping 18 and focusing on 2 and getting them done. And I think that's a lesson we can take away and take forward. The caveat here is that I've seen banks say, because of COVID, we will do everything we have to, but we will kill these 2 infrastructure projects for a new loan management platform, but we're not going to kill the innovation program that is building drones. And that as a decision is very telling about the amount of complexity you can digest, because the reality is the drones won't, even if you find an amazing business model innovation that will help your business, you won't need to do anything about it in the next 2 to 3 years. Whereas if you are building a brand new loan management platform, if you test it next year, you're going to have to go live and then do a migration. And so I'm seeing that that urgency isn't automatically translating to focus in creating that digital infrastructure that can support you. That said, you ask what has changed, and I would say one thing that has definitely changed is the way senior decision makers speak about technology and the way they understand the capabilities at their disposal, but also the opportunity that these capabilities present them with, and the fact that that language evidently goes beyond just user experience. And that has been a long time coming. But I don't know if you attended Cybos this year. One of the things that was a major takeaway for me was that every CEO I heard speak showed that even if they didn't necessarily understand every technology they referenced, they sounded like they understood fully what it can do and what that means for their strategy.
So like the kind of the true business impact of tech.
We're getting there, right? We're getting there.
Well, that's the measure move forward, because I think a lot of the commentary I've seen over the last few years is that there was a general frustration where a lot of the teams in banks were, identifying opportunities, socializing them, trying to go up through an approval stage, and then getting them squashed or getting them put in the car park. So,
yep. Definitely been there.
So, or it becomes a case. When I worked in RBS for a while in Edinburgh, it was with the Tesco joint venture. It was a bit like they would do the bits that are regulatory. They had a capacity to doing change, and they could do the stuff that was regulatory. It must be done in quote marks. And then there was nothing left capability. There was nothing left capacity-wise to do anything of any magnitude apart from that. So
absolutely,
and I would years.
I would say that was absolutely the summary of. If you ask anyone who's been in an innovation department, they'll say that's my life. What you've just described.
Right.
But for everything that has gone live, there's probably 100 that didn't. But I can exchange war stories with you like you won't believe. Killed when they were going so well. But I will also say that you look around the market and you see Mox is live in Hong Kong, right? And they, from the outside, and in conversations with the team that's running it, they haven't been shy on the hard questions of how you build that. Now, I'm sure that if you sit down with the team and say, has it been hard? They will say, oh my God, yes. But then when did you ever do something meaningful that wasn't hard? So one of the things that I have started saying recently, which shows that I am a veteran after all, is that 15 years, 10 years isn't that long a time in the grand scheme of things. So the fact that it has taken the industry this long to adjust and understand and start meaningfully putting muscle behind certain things is not that unreasonable when we're talking about systemic capabilities and a lot of money. And I don't just mean a lot of money belonging to a big trading house. I mean your grandmother's pension. I mean your mortgage. I mean the stability of the fiscal system. So hearing, for instance, the CEO of State Street recently speak about how their customers have technology real estate that varies in age and complexity, and therefore a custodian's value additive purpose is to help the customers get what they need out of those systems in the way that they need it, whatever that means. You wouldn't have heard a custodian even think that 10 years ago. But now they're thinking that, which means that they are reimagining the purpose of the business, and then they have the tools to do that. Now, I'm pretty sure that if you went in and talked to the IT department inside State Street, they'll tell you about all the battles they've lost. But if you take a step back, it's actually you've won some pretty major ones, because the shift from the way we used to think about business then to your CEO standing up in front of an audience of regulators and clients and saying, this is how I see my business now. There's a very long way to come. And I'm not saying for a moment that it's not going to have its setbacks and frustrations, but we have gone a long way. It's just that we're not done yet.
Were you saying with that, were you saying that actually what you're seeing is actually them thinking about the customer a bit more?
I think they're thinking about the customer differently. I have never met a banker, particularly in institutional banking, who wasn't thinking about the customer. And I need to, own that most of my work and experience has been in institutional banking. My time spent in retail has been more recent, when everything is client-centric, because digital is client-centric by definition. But I grew up inside institutional banking. So I spent some time with, in the FX world very, very early on. And then it was custody, fund administration, fund accounting, the fun stuff. But in that type of business-to-business banking, the customer is always front and center. And you can be cynical and say, of course, if your customer represents like 150 million worth of revenue, you're paying attention to their needs. But the reality is that the mentality of that type of banking is, we're here to empower and enable customer success. So for me, perversely, starting my career in back-end banking, as one of my friends used to call it, made it for a very, very easy transition. Because we know at BNY Mellon, for instance, we used to have client retention exercises all the time. We would go into a client and say, what are you unhappy with? We'll fix it.
Right,
now, there's absolutely no reason why you couldn't do that with a retail or an SME customer. It's just that the price tag on what you would be prepared to invest might be different, but then scale is different. Because yes, you have one customer that represents a big chunk of your wallet when you're an institutional banker, but the reality is you also have many smaller customers that are similar. If you scale that out and you have the right footprint, why not?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose that's the debate about like an individual lifetime value of a customer versus segment. It's that kind of discussion, I suppose, isn't it? Yeah. Okay, it's interesting. Yeah, I'm encouraged by your response. I think that's a big breakthrough on the CEOs actually starting to articulate and realize finally that actually they can't ignore that thing called tech. But also, I suppose it's this thing that, my experience was that there was also this thing that I felt that they were just being hamstrung by all these other regulatory and compliance, which is obviously very important because obviously you have to maintain the trust of the bank and you have to maintain security. And if you look at all the breaches and all the things that have gone, unfortunately, not the right way, then
absolutely,
that's the stuff that you've got to manage on a day-to-day basis. So
100%. But I would say you're absolutely right. And I think that for a long time that was both an obstacle, but also I don't want to call it convenient, but a familiar obstruction that anyone advocating change would be faced with. We can't do that, the regulator wouldn't permit it. We can't do that, the regulator wouldn't permit it. And then it got to a point where the regulator started not just permitting things, but actively encouraging and slowly demanding certain changes. And I think for retail banking, PSD2 was such a change. But I also think that everything from MiFID to the sort of senior management regime to pricing unbundling requirements for everything from retail through to your sort of corporate banking, and that the regulator started facing a different way and expecting a different type of behavior. So the regulator went from being a problem, quote unquote, because they wouldn't permit anything, to being again a problem, quote unquote, because they matured faster than the banks. And they started expecting and demanding a certain type of revamping of systems that put a lot of pressure on banks. And you're absolutely right in what you said earlier, that meant that for a few years, catching up with where the regulator was all the banks had money and headspace for. And we saw some wasted opportunities there because you saw a lot of banks going, PSD2, there must be an opportunity in opening up my APIs, but I can't think what it might be right now, and I need to be compliant by X date. Therefore, it becomes a compliance project.
I mean, I remember it's interesting because I think if you think about the evolution as well. I remember a few years ago in the Evening Standard, there was this big spread about Goldman Sachs or Google, yeah. And I suppose now that the utopia is now coming together in this kind of fintech world, where graduates and people coming out of university and and their master's degree or whatever have now got a really interesting choice to make. I suppose with your background. Did you just kind of stumble into banking, or because I think you did politics, didn't you? When you were
I totally stumbled into banking. I am an accidental banker. I've got a PhD in the rise of political Islam, which is not the most useful thing, but it was possibly the most interesting thing. My entrance into banking was entirely accidental and serendipitous. And I would say that it wasn't just my entrance into banking that was accidental and serendipitous, but it was also my journey because, as we were saying, if we say that the fintech clock starts with Zopa in 2005. And admittedly, it's a completely arbitrary date, but it's the one that people tend to home in on. Then that's roughly when I entered banking.
Right.
And although a lot of people, I was soon a bit later than that, but not much. You have a lot of people saying, you entered banking just before the crisis. That was a terrible time to enter. And it's like, well, it would have been a terrible time if you wanted to be a trader, yes. Or if you wanted to be like a Gordon Gekko type millionaire. But if what you're interested is transformation, which was what drew me into that sort of ops IT confluence roles, and transformation was what I worked on before innovation departments became a thing. Then I was extremely lucky, and you couldn't have planned that because we had no idea what was coming. I was extremely lucky to be at the right place at the right time to catch this wave as it started. And that bit of timing meant that what is now a vast space of companies, initiatives, entities, business models, ways of working, methodologies, and different technologies, I have some almost by osmosis, some knowledge of the entire landscape, which would be extremely hard to map out if you started today and said, I want to know the things. It's almost impossible, and I would say it's not even good use of time.
Well, maybe you could bring out this thing called Ledapedia, something like that.
Just call me and I'll give you the answer.
No, but I suppose that's the thing is because I went to the FinTech event a few years ago, down at Tobacco Dock.
Yeah.
Just watching Matt Hancock when he was the minister in charge, before he took on the health job, and just quite amazing the stuff that's coming out. Then there's probably 200 or 300 startups there. I mean, in terms of London itself, I know we're not both in London today. We're in Athens, but
our heart is in London.
That's right. Boom, 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 boom. In terms of London, what's your take on why that still is an epicenter, and why you say it's still the place to be?
So I'd say that London was extremely well placed because of the coexistence in close proximity of technical talent, creative talent, capital, and financial customers. Like even if you look at something like the US, the distance between Silicon Valley and New York is vast. And in all the other centers that have started budding since, they don't necessarily have all of those pieces close together. London has the added advantage of some excellent universities in the city and excellent universities near the city. It always attracted the curious, the enterprising, and that combination of talent, knowledge, capability, clients, and capital in a square mile, essentially, walking distance, with the added layer of an extremely friendly regulator. Eventually, didn't start off that way, but and I'm not saying the regulator was unfriendly, but the regulator wasn't particularly involved. And then when the regulator becomes involved, you have all the ingredients you want. And I think that some of that was accidental. As in it happened for other reasons, and it created the right ecosystem, literally the right ecosystem for these companies to grow. And then it's a bit like Hollywood. You don't go to Hollywood when you're an actor. You go to Hollywood because you want to be an actor, but you also stay in Hollywood when you're an actor. So I think there is an element of momentum that is acquired, that it just helps, like talent sloshing about, proximity and collaboration. You see a lot of folks. So, for instance, Fronted, which is a very, very interesting young startup, started by Jamie and Simon. Jamie was a bud, Simon was a Monzo, but they knew each other because it's an ecosystem, and they did great work where they were, and then they got to know each other as humans, not just over Zoom, and and then they got to share this idea that was driving both of them, and they've created this sort of principle-driven business about a problem they felt needed solving. So once you have those ingredients and people are attracted to that place because the right jobs and the right talent is there, you have literally an ecosystem. So new ideas will emerge.
It's a cauldron of things, isn't it? Yeah.
And it's bigger than the sum of its parts, because one of the most fascinating things, I know that there's like this big thing about the breakup between like Anne and Tom, and how Monzo and Starling came out, and it came out in the press. And I know that there's obviously...
Well, you mean the worst kept secret in neobank history? You mean?
The absolute worst kept secret. But what I was going to say is, I mean, I know both of them, but I don't know them well enough to have a view on this. But I would say that a lot of startups have grown out of other startups. And it's mostly non-dramatic or traumatic. Mostly it's a journey, and people get to know each other and discover that they have this burning desire, and they go off and create something. And that's what I say always to people who say to me, we are creating an ecosystem. It's like, no, you're creating a laboratory. It's very, very different to try and replicate the conditions that made the Amazonian forest the right environment for a certain type of life to flourish, and quite a different thing to say, it's happening naturally. Now, do I think that the uncertainties of both Brexit and COVID will have an impact? Yes, I do. But and I have been lamenting Brexit really loudly for a very long time, and I'm still very sad about it. But there might be a situation where the global crisis of COVID may even, I wouldn't say supersede, but it will definitely muddle and outweigh the direct impacts of Brexit, particularly as mobility all of a sudden has become a massive problem.
Yes.
Because with Brexit becoming the specter for so long, people have toyed with the idea of moving or opening another entity to have that passporting thing. Now, a bigger crisis looms. It's not as clear where is safe. So the fintech scene is losing a lot of that serendipity, because there has always been that human-to-human collaboration.
Yeah, dynamic. Yeah, exactly.
We might get a lease of life because nobody's moving right now. And you might get an opportunity to actually preserve that amazing ecosystem and the creativity that comes out of it.
Yeah, I mean, do you think Brexit is still, I mean, legally it's supposed to still happen, isn't it? But I suppose it's going to dissipate. The impact of it is going to be minimalised because...
No, I don't think it will be minimalised. I think it will be brutal. I think it will be absolutely brutal. But I think that it will be very hard to... I think that the impact of COVID will be brutal as well. It will be very hard to tell which was which. I also... I would have told... We had this conversation before Brexit. I would have told you that one of the hardest things... before COVID. Would have told you that one of the hardest things about Brexit is the uncertainty of not knowing how to plan your business continuity and your business optionality, particularly for a startup. You know, a big bank that has offices in 88 locations, I'm making this up, has Brexit contingency plans that are easy to implement. If you're a 30-person startup and you need to have continuity of operations, acquire another operating license or move, that's a big bit of disruption. I would say that the disruption that COVID is bringing is coming on top of that and is even bigger. So it's not that it neutralizes the effect of Brexit, but it does complicate the issue, and it makes it impossible for anyone to plan. So it's not like that UK-based businesses will be on the back foot compared to the others because they can't plan, which would have been the case otherwise. Nobody can plan now. So there's a bit of a leveling effect.
Yeah, well, I wasn't going to use the phrase trumped because obviously it's quite topical at the moment. But it's a bit like what I was trying to get across was it felt like that the situation with COVID was such a big impact. It kind of trumped the impact of Brexit.
Yeah.
From a different dynamic, I suppose.
I think it definitely did do that in terms of the momentum lost by not knowing how to plan. The reality, as you say, it's legally still happening. The way it happens, the tariffs, the collaborations, the passporting, all the actual hard implications of it will tell us what the additional impact will be. But up until now, it has been the uncertainty that has the biggest impact. And now COVID has put the entire world in an uncertain pattern. So that misery is now more widely shared, which, as I said, is the worst thing you can wish upon anybody. But it might create some breathing space in that sense. The legal implications are yet to be seen.
I suppose that the phrase I've been using recently, which seems to kind of land quite with a smile, is a bit like what I'll call PPP. So PPP is a pandemic-proof proposition. It's back to that, you know, actually, how does...
Like Zoom.
Sorry?
Like Zoom.
Yes, exactly. Well, yeah, I mean, look at, you know, if you think about the growth, you know, some people have actually done really well out of this situation, and some people have struggled. But that's what it does. If you're in a startup environment, then it does allow you to, you've got to then work out how do you navigate that. Is your proposition, you know, on you know, in the bullseye? Can it survive this type of situation? I know obviously it's been pretty difficult for a lot of people this year. It will continue to be. It
has. And there was a very sobering report from Bohurst last week, a list of companies that didn't make it in London.
Right.
Like direct link to COVID wound up operations. And of course, startups sadly die all the time. But they die quietly. And actually having that attention drawn to this fact has been interesting. But also quite a few, as you see, quite a few business models are pandemic proof. Quite a few propositions are definitely growing in appeal in terms of, you know, something that is vaguely interesting in an open world becomes extremely valuable in a closed up world.
So I mean, I know we talked a bit about obviously the T stuff and some of the stuff in banking and some of the dynamics around that. In terms of, you know, your journey so far, you know, one of the things I talk about is peaks and valleys. So, you know, if you can describe some of, you know, your peaks and valleys so far in your journey so far, what would be some of the examples you give? People can learn from, I suppose.
I'd say the first thing I would say, because I've been thinking about that since we scheduled the session. I think the things that feel like peaks and valleys actually, with hindsight, weren't what they necessarily felt like. So if you asked me what were the things that felt in the moment as the ultimate peak and the ultimate hit, I could tell you, but with hindsight, the things that I thought were extremely important didn't turn out to be the most important things. And the things that turned out to be the most important things didn't seem as big when they happened because they had a sort of slow evolution.
Right.
I'd say in terms of valleys, one of the things that was hard, definitely for me at the beginning of my career, and is I suspect hard for everyone at the start of their career, but particularly difficult within big institutions, is that when you are growing up in an institution, you learn a lot, but there is never a clear way, because the people surrounding you have grown up in that institution usually. There's never a clear way of knowing what is us and what is everybody. What is the why for the what I do, and how do I know that what I'm learning is a transferable skill? And if the time comes to articulate what it is that I do in a way that travels between organizations, how do I do that? Now, I think that there's a lot more material today that helps people do that. So sessions like this one, conferences. So the vocabulary and the examples that help people articulate that is definitely much more available, but it's still a difficult journey. And I do remember times in my career where I knew that it was time to move up or out.
Right. Okay.
And I had kind of completed a cycle, that there wasn't necessarily much more for me other than more of the same in a particular role. And it wasn't necessarily, sometimes, you're like, okay, these are my choices. This is the path. It's going to be hard, but it's there. There've been times when that wasn't necessarily very clear because that transferability isn't very clear. And I would say that some of the hardest moments in my career have been that. I'd say the other hardest repeatable moment is, and I'll say that is universal, bad bosses.
Right.
We've all had them. And it's the pits. It's something that can ruin your workday and your work-life balance and your mental health. And I think we have a long way to go as an industry from moving away from a narrative of tenacity. If you have a bad boss, you have to like stick it out. No, you have to.
Stiff up a lip? Yeah, stiff up a lip.
Yeah. So I would say that in that sense, my peaks, I would say with hindsight in terms of their usefulness, have been very good bosses who have given me space to grow, but didn't withhold their support. So there was the space to grow, but they would catch you if you fell.
Right. Yeah.
And they were the peaks because of the accelerated growth and knowledge you have during those times. And it doesn't necessarily feel that way in the moment, but then you look back and go, oh, we've gone a long way here.
It sounds like they cared and they actually were coaching and mentoring and trying to give you feedback and doing all those kind of things that you should do.
And getting out of your way.
Yeah.
And it's the telltale signs of it's the boss that doesn't give you their work to do. It's job that gives you an outcome. You know that you go from one day of being given a PowerPoint to do to being told to achieve a result. The deliverable to the executives is still a PowerPoint, but you own the thinking, you own, and the transitions inside a bank is, you could go one desk along and the world changes.
But then I think also that thing when you said about the what and the why just then as well, also that's giving you the context of where I suppose it's the motivation to do the job you're doing. And
right.
And your line manager, and obviously it's quite hierarchical in some organizations, unless they do the cascade, unless they explain where you fit in achieving the overall company strategy, or there's comms around that, then you're going to feel a bit disconnected. And you may then, to your point, make a choice about, do you go, do you try and apply for something in the same organization, or do you go through the door? I suppose that's the...
Exactly. And you're absolutely right, it is connected. And the way you learn is connected, and the way you can measure your own effectiveness is connected. But because that awareness helps feed your confidence, your growth is accelerated when you get that context.
Yeah, that's great. That's good. So in terms of, one of the things I was just thinking about this, then when you were talking about was what gets you excited these days? Then what are you excited about at the moment, apart from being in Athens like me?
Well, Athens is great, although sadly I'm not going to be here for much longer. Apparently, I have to go check my home and stuff. I'm excited about a series of things at the moment. I would say, let me put it in threes, because 3 is a good number. I'm really excited to be in a position to be able to support some really great businesses as a non-exec. I'm working with a number of companies that have different propositions, and they're taking meaningful challenges and trying to crack them in terms of servicing an underserviced community, like Simply Pay Me addressing the needs of the SMEs, trying to be to crack some of the needs for objective data around fintech technologies, capabilities, and businesses like Indexable, or GFI working on data-driven insight for the real estate industry. Really different propositions, different geographies, different maturities. And I can be sitting in the room with all three of them, learning and helping at the same time. And that's an incredible situation. The second area that gets me really excited and I'm increasingly involved in is that vulnerability in financial services has become an FCA priority. That the vulnerable customers that were always either an afterthought or a community that the banks didn't feel responsible for are increasingly becoming a focal point. And the question of how do we use our intuitive data gathering capabilities and our amazing UX to service these communities? The question is being raised, and it won't have an easy answer, but the question is being asked now, and it's amazing to see people coming together to say, okay, what is the exam question? What are we trying to solve, and how can we solve it? And also realizing that it's not just a regulator question or just a individual responsibility question, just a bank question. And I would say the third piece is from putting my sort of ex-banker hat back on, it's time to get real. I'll circle back to your very, very first question. We've been doing this a long time. We've gone fair ways down the road. A lot of stuff hasn't gone as fast as we wanted it to. And I think we're reaching this pivotal moment. And in many ways, COVID will accelerate this. This is, we have to go all the way now. We have to truly digitize all the way down so we can have these services meaningfully reaching our customers, whatever happens from a, world stage perspective. And I do think that not everyone will do it, not everyone will want to, not everyone will be able to, but I do think that if we are going to see some meaningful, profound transformation, it's going to kick off now.
It's just like a real wake-up call, basically, finally.
I really, really hope so.
So, I suppose on the converse of that, I suppose what are you grateful for?
That's such a nice question. It's a scary time in the world over, and I'm sitting right now in my parents' home. My boyfriend's across the table from me. We're all safe. We're healthy. I have the means and the time and the connectivity and the connection to be having this conversation with you and to be part of an ecosystem that allows me to remain connected and employed and useful, both despite geography, but also despite the fact that such a big chunk of the world is suffering, is cut off. The divides between the haves and have-nots and the ares and the are-nots in our world are really becoming sharper. And that's absolutely heartbreaking, and we all have a duty to do something about it. But no matter how hard it's gotten, I'm grateful that the people I love are around me, healthy, and the things that I have worked hard to build have changed but have not been taken away from me the way other people have seen their life's work be taken away from them by circumstance and not even know whether they will have a chance to recover it.
Yeah, no, it's certainly, it makes you really think about everything, your whole life and everything that's going on there. Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. I mean, to kind of, I suppose, think about the kind of the what I would call pearls of wisdom. So if you've been through a tremendous journey already and experienced lots of different amazing things. And we talked about peaks and valleys, but to my mind, people view that as sometimes as failure or not having a great outcome. But actually, you've learned from something from that.
Oh God, yeah.
And that reflection sounds like that reflection process is also useful. I've gone through a similar kind of thing. So, if you were kind of giving advice, and you sounds like you are giving advice to founders and co-founders and leadership teams today about the pearls of wisdom, what are the kind of things that you've I suppose curated and you would say have been the top things that you think people should think about as they embark on this, on our next decade, as we go into the future? What
I would say that specifically for founders, the hardest thing to do is say no to things. But it's extremely important to know when to say no, and to constantly challenge yourself on whether you should be saying no to things. Equally, my entire career has been a celebration of being open to serendipity. And that combination of knowing when to say no to things, but also remaining open to serendipity is not an easy balance to strike, but it's important. I would say the second thing is that it's very easy to talk about values and principles on a good day, and very easy to find excuses why they don't apply on any given difficult day. But I would say that the hardest thing to do, or rather the hardest thing to deal with, is allowing yourself that flexibility. You need to live by those values every day. My friend Josh describes it as the way you do anything is the way you do everything. And one of the hardest things and one of the biggest things I've seen companies of all sizes get wrong is that their values are only applicable on very, very good days. And business imperatives kick in the rest of the time. There is a possibility and there is an opportunity to marry the two and balance the two. And it is absolutely vital that you do that, because that's when it matters the most. The things you tolerate, it's the way you make the hard decisions, it's what you prioritize. And I cannot stress that enough for companies of all sizes. It doesn't stop being an imperative. The third thing I would say is that it's very easy to say you're people-centric and very easy to tell when you're not. There is no shame in having a business that is all about the client or all about the profit or all about the product. Some people will really be drawn to that. I know it's the fashion and the trend to say you're people-centric. My advice is be people-centric, because people who are secure and supported pull out all the stops for each other and therefore for you as their employer. But you can't fake it. So
it's not a veneer.
No, it can't be, because it collapses very, very quickly. But if you feel it, do it, because it will pay off many times over.
Fantastic. That's a great way to finish off the episode, because I think it's some very powerful statements you made there, and very, very, very good learnings for people who listen to this episode.
Well, I'm glad. I've really enjoyed this.
Good. That was the idea, you see. As we're now going to go to the beach now.
Sun has come out here as well.
So that was fantastic. Thank you very much for your time today, and
My pleasure.
Keep safe, and look forward to seeing you in London when you're next back in the in the smoke. And that
Sounds great.
Leda Glyptis, who is gone uber plural, and the glitterati of the fintech scene in London and financial services. So thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you for having me.
And that was Andrew Turner, founder and host of the G&T Sessions podcast. Have a great day.